Welcome to Geopolitical Horizons, the podcast from geopolity.com. We're fast approaching the end of 2023, and here at Geopolity, our analysts are working hard on our forecast for 2024, which we will publish on the 1st of January. So 2024 will be a bumper year for elections. There are scheduled to be 76 national elections across the world, with over 4 billion people going to the polls. Some of the world's most powerful nations will have elections next year, as well as a number of strategic nations. The outcome of many of these will have global repercussions that will shape relations in the 2030s. Here to discuss this once again is Geopolity founder Adnan Khan. How are you keeping, Adnan?
I'm good, Yusuf. How are you doing?
I'm very good. It's a very big year next year.
It most certainly is.
I mean, let's start with this obvious question. How have we got to this point where there's so many elections happening in one year?
So it's just pot luck, really, Yusuf. I've been trying to read around how we got in a position where half the world will be electing their leaders. And it's actually just by chance, really, that we're in a position where so many 76 elections, as you mentioned. That's what, just under half of the world's countries. It's obviously 4 billion people. There's a lot of people that are going to the polls. But just because there are elections in so many countries doesn't mean...
Is this a good thing for democracy with so many countries having free elections?
So, Yusuf, just because there are so many elections taking place in so many countries, it doesn't actually mean things are looking up for democracy. So, elections are going to take place next year in the UK, in Russia, in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, and the US in November as well. So some of the largest nations by population, they are also going to the polls next year. So Russia and Indonesia. But in many places such as Bangladesh and Russia, we can't really call these elections. These are not free and fair elections. And the polls still show, Yusuf, and the research, that confidence in democracy is still rock bottom. Confidence in politicians doing the right thing and representing the people, these are still rock bottom. And this is why already in Argentina, we've had an unorthodox individual win. You just had Geert Wilders come into power as well. So just because we're having elections, it doesn't mean things are good for democracy. Things are still looking bad in terms of democracy serving the people. But the fact that there's so many elections next year, it means this obviously could impact international relations. It could have an impact on the direction of some strategic countries. And that's why from that perspective, it's probably important we do look at some of the more key nations and how the election may impact those nations.
Probably one of the most consequential elections next year is the US election in November. Do you think we're going to see a rematch of Biden and Trump?
So you said the term unprecedented territory is probably outdated as a term now when we're looking at in America. So the election next year, we're probably going to need to coin new terms, really. Because, you know, what we're facing, and barring any unforeseen circumstances, it does look as though we're going to see a rematch of the last election between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. So, yes, it's very likely that that's actually going to happen.
Over the last year or so, Trump's actually been in a lot of trouble. What's the likelihood of him actually managing to get to the elections with everything that he's been up to?
So you're absolutely right. Even though Trump lost the election, although he doesn't believe he did lose, and I think half the electorate doesn't believe he lost, he's actually been very busy since the last election in 2019. Firstly, Trump, obviously, he refused to accept the result last time round. His supporters refused to accept the result. And effectively, his supporters become a cult for Donald Trump. And they've been spreading this idea that the election was rigged, the election was stolen, and actually, you know, the 2019 election will probably always be remembered in history that potentially it was stolen. All of this eventually it led to the Capitol Hill attack, the Capitol Hill riot. So that was where Trump effectively incited his supporters to rise up against Capitol Hill when they were supposed to be signing off the electoral result. So since then, Yusuf, he's got 4 indictments. An indictment in America is our equivalent if he's been charged. So he's been charged on 4 counts of breaking the law. And some of these cover him when he was president. And some of these indictments are to do with when he wasn't president as well. So these charges include obstructing official proceedings, to a conspiracy to defraud the US as well. So in total, Trump faces 91 charges in 4 separate trials. That's really what's been going on during the last 4 years. So when the trials begin, they're scheduled to begin in March next year. And it's unlikely any of these cases will be concluded by election day next November 2024. So even if Trump was to stand and he was to win, the result of these court cases won't be concluded by the time he becomes president. That will take us into unprecedented territory because you have a president who has legal immunity, but he's been charged. So we'll have to see if we come to that. Then also, we have to keep in mind the US election cycle works with a number of primaries taken by the two parties who decide who would be the contender. So the Republicans have been battling it out, and they're now down to about 4 people. And it's really these 4, can they really take on Donald Trump? So you've got DeSantis, you've got Nikki Haley, you've got Ramaswamy, and you've got the 4th chap who I can't quite remember. So by March next year, we will know if the Republican candidate is Donald Trump or not, but the primaries will be finished. And then for 8 months straight, you have an election campaign. So Trump's support is amongst all of the Republican base. It doesn't really extend beyond that. And he is using the proceedings against him to show that there's a left-wing plot to prevent him from winning a second term, and actually it's working for him already. So whilst he's on trial for undermining democracy, he's saying that the real threat to democracy is the federal court that's putting him on trial. That's his whole perspective on what he's been doing for the last 4 years, and probably what he's going to do going into the election. Now, he's a contender who obviously is going to be the sitting president, the incumbent Joe Biden. There are serious question marks, Yusuf, over his mental state. He's 81 years old currently. He will be the oldest president if he was to win. And there's even question marks, Yusuf, will Joe Biden be able to finish his term? Which means that if he doesn't finish his term, his vice president, Kamala Harris, would become president, which obviously upsets a lot of Republicans.
I find it a little bit confusing that he could potentially still stand as a candidate for the elections. Is that possible?
So at the moment, Yusuf, Donald Trump, he's not been found guilty and no trial has even started yet. So because it's only been charged, he's still innocent until proven guilty. So there's actually no obstacles to actually stand legally. We have to also bear in mind, Yusuf, the US Constitution only put 3 broad conditions for anyone to run for president. And these are, firstly, the candidate must be at least 35 years old. Secondly, he must be a natural-born US citizen. So unfortunately, that rules out Arnold Schwarzenegger ever standing as president because he wasn't born in America, although he's an American citizen now. And the third condition, they should have resided in the United States for the last 14 years. So these rules were brought in when America was created. So they're very generic, they're very broad. They don't actually talk about if he's a criminal, if he's been held in contempt previously, nothing whatsoever. So beyond these 3 conditions, Yusuf, there are actually very few restrictions to holding office in America. And even in lower elected offices, it's the same criteria. There are some exceptions. So for example, if you engage in insurrection or rebellion, that was a provision put in during the Civil War in the past in America, that bars you from standing for office. So there was a judge actually who disqualified a county commissioner from holding office in 2022 because the person had participated in the Capitol Hill attack. That was in a lower office. But there's no limitation based on character or criminal record. There's obviously practical issues. If he goes to prison, how can he get security data? How can he physically run the country when he's actually in prison? So there are practical issues, but from a legal perspective, there's actually no obstacle to him standing.
What impact do you think Trump would have if he did have a second term in office?
So Trump's already been positioning himself. I mean, he's saying that his second term will be retribution, which is that there's many people who he feels screwed him over and he wants to go after them. On foreign policy, if he becomes president, what's his impact on America's global position? What you find, Yusuf, Trump is repeatedly touting his relationship with authoritarian leaders like Russia's Putin and the Chinese Premier Xi Jinping, and even the North Korean leader. He says he can end the Ukraine-Russia war in 24 hours by bringing the two countries' leaders together. His main impact obviously is going to be more on domestic policy. So he's actually got a project with his team. It's called Project 2025. And it's actually a plan to reshape the executive branch of the US by placing conservative supporters in civil service positions. And he says this is in order to deal with the deep state. So if he becomes president, that has massive ramifications. He's literally trying to reshape the government, civil service, and all the departments with loyalists and people he supports. Beyond that, Trump believes America is a power. He just believes that other countries should pay their way rather than America provide them with security. So we'll probably see a continuation of a lot of his old policies as well. Probably the key difference at the moment is probably Ukraine. He doesn't support the Ukraine war, and he believes it needs to be brought to an end, and that will probably be the main difference. And I'm sure, Yusuf, in the next 8 to 9 months, we're going to hear a lot more of Trump's policy. We're going to hear a lot more about Trump's bluster, like he does. So a lot of it we're probably going to have to wait and see, but it's going to put America in a very unprecedented position, and it really shows the American system can really handle an outsider like this.
Russia also has elections next year in March. Is there any point in asking who do you think is going to win?
So, yeah, in all likelihood, Putin will win. And the reason why Putin's going to win is the elections, they're not real elections in Russia. What you have is elections that are irrelevant because the system is heavily controlled and skewed in favor of the security class. The security class took power under Putin in the late 1990s, and they're really still in power. So elections in Russia are used by the state, which is the security class, to legitimize their political regime. So obviously they control who the opposition is. It's illegal in Russia for people to provide finance and to give media coverage to their supporting candidates. They're not actually allowed to do that. So really, elections there to legitimize the system in Russia. These are not free and fair elections. So really, we shouldn't look too much into it. And we've got to keep in mind that in 2020, they made constitutional amendments in Russia to the regime. So Putin can now do 2 further 6-year terms if he wins. So I think obviously this election in Russia, which is in March, it will take place with the 2-year anniversary of Ukraine war done, with the war having an impact on the economy. So I think the voter turnout will be a litmus test of how much support does Putin actually have. And that's probably the most we can glean from this election. I wouldn't really use elections to judge what is going on inside Russia because they're not real elections.
Will Ukraine war performance have any impact on the election for Putin?
So I think, Yusuf, if we're going to be 2 years in end of February. So when this election takes place in March, it'll be the two years have gone by. Now, if Russia was performing really badly, lots of its troops were dying, I think this would have an impact. But the reality here is Russia is now back on top in Ukraine. What's really happened in the last year is Ukraine, obviously Russia had a really bad start. Its rush to Kiev didn't really work out, and Ukraine had some successes in some areas in the north and the south. But what's happened since then is Russia adjusted, it adapted, and the counteroffensive that Ukraine began in March, April this year, in order to drive a wedge between Russia's defenses, it hasn't worked. It's actually failed. And actually, Russia is now on top. Russia hasn't even sent in its 300,000 mobilized troops yet. And we're seeing now in the last 2 weeks, there's more chatter from the West that Ukraine should start talking to Russia. Ukraine should start the negotiations. So I don't think Ukraine will have an impact purely because Russia's doing well in the war. It's on top now. It's actually Ukraine who's struggling. And, just this week, I think Zelensky's wife is doing the rounds saying that the West needs to keep supporting Ukraine, otherwise they want me to stay in the war. So, if anything, Putin's in a stronger position to go into the elections now with the state of the war in Ukraine.
Ukraine also have their elections, but is it likely they're going to have elections with the country being occupied and at war at the same time?
Yeah, so this is interesting because Zelensky is saying we shouldn't have elections, it should be delayed because of the war. But actually, everyone around him is saying they want elections. It seems people have had enough of Zelensky now. So, even the heavyweight boxer who's the mayor of Kiev, he's actually said that Zelensky is becoming more and more authoritarian and we want him to go. And there's a good chance he won't win the election because the war's going badly now. He was all the rage for 2022 because he's leading the war effort, leading for the front, but the war's not actually going well now. I mean, whether he goes or not, I don't think it changes the battlefield reality. The reality here is the Ukrainians are dependent upon the West, and the West are basically forcing Ukraine now to shift their war material to Israel in the war Israel's having over there. So I think the Ukrainian elections probably won't bode well for Zelensky himself, but everyone around him is saying there has to be election. They won election. And actually, they've been very critical of Zelensky, that he's becoming more and more dictatorial. In fact, the boxer, the heavyweight boxer, former heavyweight boxer, he actually said that we're at war with Putin whilst our leader is with the same tactics as Putin. So yeah, it doesn't bode well for him.
Let's talk about UK, something a little bit closer to home. It seems like we've just had so many different prime ministers in the last couple of years, and we might have another one. The election is going to happen end of 2024 or maybe early 2025. What's the political context here? What can we expect? Do you think Rishi Sunak is going to stand a chance?
So the political context, Yusuf, is people have had enough of the Tories. People want them out. And the Labour Party is 25 points ahead. So it's highly unlikely the Tories are going to win. And the Tories can see the writings on the wall. So that's why the knives are out for Rishi Sunak. And that's why people like Suella Braverman, they've all been positioning themselves so they can be part of the leadership race. So we've had 4 elections since Cameron stepped down because of the Brexit vote, and it looks like probably they're going to have another one. That's why the Tory party is going hard on their right-wing policies to try and maintain some support. I think there's going to be a lot of heavyweight losses. Some heavyweight politicians are going to lose their seats. People have really had enough of the Tory party. I mean, it's been 13 years of living standards actually falling in the country. So the timetable is the parliamentary term finishes on the 24th of December next year. So the rule in the UK is you have to have elections within 25 days. So unless there's an early election, there'll be an election in January 2025. So really, we know if they're going to call an early election, it'll probably be before the summer next year, which is highly unlikely because they call an early election, they're just signing their own grave really much earlier. UK's got some major challenges, Yusuf. The Labour Party are going to take over, and they already are now pulling back on a lot of their core policy. They're talking about not making drastic change, not increasing public investment. The UK's got a massive problem, which is it's got these huge political objectives around the world, but it has no economic or military power to back them up. So they've left the European Union now, and most people will vote to join the European Union again. Whoever's in power is going to have to try and make a success story of Brexit, which is going to be very, very difficult. You've obviously had a cost of living crisis going on in the UK, and the Tory party have just completely undermined the political process in the country. The fact that they keep having to elect new leaders for the leading party. Rishi Sunak, Yusuf, he only became an MP in 2015, and he only got into the cabinet because Boris Johnson wanted someone weak who didn't have any support base, and he couldn't challenge him. And because Boris Johnson lied because of COVID, he had to step down. And Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss fought it out. She won. And in 30 days, she had to step down because she did such a poor job. I don't think he ever thought, since he's been in Parliament, that he'd ever become the Prime Minister of the country. But, he was in the right place at the right time. Wasn't there with controversy. But the problem you've really got with Sunak, he's a technocrat. He's good with numbers. Politicians, people want vision. People want someone that can talk. They want someone like Obama. They want someone to inspire them. That is not what Rishi Sunak is. But even if Rishi Sunak won all of those things, people just hate the Tory party at the moment. They've had 13 years of austerity and people want them out. So, that's really the political conflict. Unless, there's a war, Britain can't have an election. I think that's probably the only thing, the black swan event. Other than that, it's not really looking good for the Tory party.
If we move over to South Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, they all have elections next year. If we start with India, the BJP, Modi, they seem to have a lot of support. What's the chances the opposition will unseat Modi and the BJP?
So, Yusuf, any chance the opposition had to unseat them has just been disproven this week because the BJP have just won 4 key regional states. So what little chance the opposition had, that's completely gone. The opposition, what they were trying to do, there was a 23-party coalition who were going to try and stand up to the BJP. But although it's a 23-party coalition, most of these parties are very, very small. They stand very little chance. The Congress Party, Yusuf, is on the margins. It has no politician who has graft, has no politician who has national standing. So it's very unlikely they're going to be able to unseat the BJP. What the BJP have really done is two things. Firstly, there's been some reforms on the economy. They've tried to digitalize the whole of India. So that's one strategy they had. And then the other thing they've done is obviously this Hindu identity. They've really used that to get India behind them. And this obviously has led to the discrimination of a lot of minorities, a lot of Muslims. So, it's a very sensitive issue, but it's one of the issues that is getting the BJP and Modi a lot of support. So I don't see anything really changing in India. And from the opposition, I can't see really anything that they can really use to their advantage to change the status quo.
What about in Pakistan? It seems like Nawaz Sharif is slowly making his fourth comeback. What do you make of that?
Yeah, Nawaz Sharif's made more comebacks than any sporting team or any sportsman. So obviously, the last few podcasts that we've done on Pakistan, it was about Imran Khan being thrown out in a vote of no confidence, the army abandoning him, and then since then his own party has abandoned him. He's going through a number of court cases now, and then really what we've seen now is the return of Nawaz Sharif. And what you're seeing is the setup in Pakistan is becoming more and more clear. Nawaz Sharif being brought back, he's going to get another term. He's obviously got his brother Shahbaz Sharif, who's the current prime minister. Imran Khan can't stand because he's in prison. He's got court cases coming up. His own party has joined the other parties now. So the army's really done its role. It's, use Imran Khan to maintain the system. Now Imran Khan outlived his use and he's become a bit of a threat. And they've got the setup in place. Now, the only caveat, Yusuf, is in many ways, Yusuf, there's something wrong with you if you want to win the election in Pakistan. Because the economic situation, strategic situation is so bad, whoever inherits it, you are signing your own death check, basically. You're signing your own life away. And I will say, Yusuf, whoever wins the election, which is going to be Nawaz Sharif, within a year, they're going to run into a lot of trouble. The economy is not good. Pakistan signed over so many key issues to the IMF, who are squeezing Pakistan. So within a year again, what you're going to find is the winds will start again against the Sharif family, and the opposition will form who will sense the opportunity to unseat them and take power. You have to bear in mind, Yusuf, Nawaz Sharif's been in power 3 times. He never finished his term. He's always been thrown out because of corruption or overthrown. And I think it's highly unlikely he's going to see the end of his 4th term as well. So this last week, the court cleared Nawaz Sharif in one of his 3 cases that were on him from when Imran Khan managed to drag him through the courts. So already the PPP and others are saying that the army's clearing the way for him, and they're standing against this because it means they can't really fight Nawaz Sharif because he's got the advantage of the army support. So I think these guys in a year or two they will become the opposition to Nawaz Sharif, and we'll have the same merry-go-round politics. And all of this takes place where the situation for your average person really bad and rock bottom.
Bangladesh will also have elections. It's something my family, especially my father-in-law, have been watching very closely. Can we expect there? Can Sheikh Hasina be unseated?
So looking very unlikely, Yusuf. I mean, this week already the opposition, the BNP have said that they're planning to not take part in the elections. They're going to boycott the election, which is what they did last time round. And that's because they can see the elections won't be free and fair. At the moment in Bangladesh, you've got the garment workers on strike, which is key for Bangladesh's economy. Even these elections, I think they were being dragged out, and the election commission said there needs to be elections, and so they've called for them. But really, the opposition is not strong enough or united enough to stand up to Sheikh Hasina or the Awami League. I don't see anything changing really in Bangladesh. The last elections, there was a lot of criticism from the international community, and there was a lot of violence as well. I suspect the same will happen again, but with the opposition not taking part, in many ways it makes it easier for the Awami League really to win. I think it's their 3rd 4-year term. So yeah, I don't see much changing there unless something really drastic happens in the next couple of weeks.
If we move over to the Middle East, Egypt goes to the polls. I was just reading about it today, actually. Sisi won 97% of the vote. Can we really consider it an election?
So, previously the opposition against Sisi wasn't as high and bad as it is now. Now, obviously, it's been, literally, it's the decade anniversary. It was 2013, where he overthrew the Muslim Brotherhood government. And since then, he's become more and more authoritarian, and he's run the economy into the ground. So now he's having to use the iron grip. So the actual first round of the election, Yusuf, it's actually the end of December. The winner doesn't get 50%, it goes to a second round. So obviously, the opposition who's standing, they are highly vetted. And so only a token opposition is allowed to physically stand. And I think it may even go to a second round, and probably Sisi needs this to give some sort of confidence into the system. But, the lives of Egyptians is completely out of sync with what's going on here with the elections. The inflation going through the roof, the country's been sold to the IMF, the daily life of people is so difficult, and we're going to have an election. And, the guy who runs the country, he's been the leader for 10 years to run the country completely into the ground. So, unfortunately, that's the context we have this. So although there will be an election, we can't really take this election seriously because, there's no real opposition. And the media, the election council commission they've got, all of that's controlled by the army anyway. So really, this is just a token election.
You spoke earlier about are the elections, is it a good sign for democracy? I guess this shows that really it's kind of a farce.
So, when we talk about democracy, for a lot of people, that's synonymous to elections. Now, democracy doesn't mean more than that, but you find there's all these measurements of countries, freedom, democracy, and if you have election, then you're considered to be part of the civilized world. But as you're right, you look beneath the surface, most of these elections are not. Even in UK elections, you've only got two parties to choose from. There's no third, fourth, fifth party. In America, you've only got two parties. There's no chance of choosing another party. In these elections, these are not, can we change the institutions? Can we shut some institutions down, start up a new one? It's really, can we pick the driver for the system? You're just changing personnel. You can't make any underlying changes. And that's why, although there's more elections, it doesn't mean people are happier. It doesn't mean there's more progress, more economic development. In fact, it doesn't mean any of that. And there's a question here. Fulfilling your basic necessities, being a developed nation, how is that synonymous to democracy? Because there's countries that have elections that are in a mess. And there's countries like China who don't have elections and the country's developing. So, more elections doesn't equal, the world's going in the right direction.
The country, is the outcome going to have any ramifications, especially with its relationship with China?
So I think China will definitely be watching this very, very closely. So you've got two parties in Taiwan. One is pro-China. It wants to unify with China. But the one that's in power, they want Taiwan to be independent. They want to have a relationship with China, but as two sovereign countries. Now, the party that wants independence is clear to really win this election. So this causes a bit of a problem for China. China, when it looks at Taiwan, what it sees is two options. There's the military option to unify, or there's the political option like Hong Kong, where you have two countries, two systems. Then you make the system more in line with the mainland. And then eventually, even though there's some significant autonomy, it's part of China. Now, with the party that's in power, that's likely to be in power also, the party that wants independence, the diplomatic route isn't an option. So if this party does win next month in January, this makes the military option the last remaining and only viable option. As Xi Jinping has already said, by 2027, he wants the country to be ready to unify with Taiwan. So yes, these elections will have ramifications. And if the party that's pro-independence and anti-China wins, which is looking very likely, then this doesn't bode well for the future, actually. It means that for Xi Jinping or the Chinese Communist Party, the military solution is the only solution left, because diplomatically, you won't be able to negotiate with the alternative party.
And the final elections that I wanted to ask you about was the EU Parliament. I don't really know how this would work. Is there anything we should be looking for? Does it really have any impact on the geopolitics of the world?
So yeah, the European parliamentary elections are due to take place in June 2024. And in these elections, what happens is the 27 EU nations, they elect representatives for a supranational legislator. So this is a parliament that transcends borders. But what you find, Yusuf, more often than not, individuals that stand here, they stand in order to reward or punish their national governments. So what you find is the European Union Parliament, it doesn't supersede national parliaments, but everybody that gets involved with the EU Parliament is in order to strengthen their position domestically as well. So from that sense, it is important. Obviously, the European Union is in charge of 27 countries. They need to strengthen Europe, especially with the war in Ukraine going on. Really, the backdrop these elections are going to take place in is high inflation, economic issues, and actually, Yusuf, it's likely, and we've seen this already, is right-wing parties will perform well compared to the traditional centre and green parties. So what this means is if more far-right parties do well, then what will likely happen is they will reverse the policies on green tech. They will become more and more Eurosceptic, and they will probably even delay the transition the European Union is in, which is to move away from fossil fuels to renewable energy. So really what you've got is the future direction of the EU is at stake here in these elections. And obviously, the EU impacts countries like Germany, Italy, Spain, these larger EU countries, who really are key figures in the European Union. So already we've seen the right-wing win in Holland. You've got the party in Germany that's doing well, the right-wing party. You've got a number of Eastern European countries where the right-wing are doing well as well. So really, the key thing to really look for in the EU election next year is, do the traditional mainstream individuals and parties, will they be replaced or push the margins and the right-wing actually come through? And that's probably the key thing to watch when we look at the EU elections.
Thank you for your time today, Adnan. There's a lot to take in, a lot to watch over the next year. If you want to learn more about the issues raised today, please check out our website, www.thegeopolity.com, all one word. You can look out for our annual forecast on the 1st of January, our annual strategic estimate report on the 29th of December. I'm Yusuf. Thank you for listening.